Furia is not an autobiographical novel, but it's very much based in my life and my experiences growing up in Rosario, Argentina, and that's where I'm from. I moved to the US when I was 19, and although it's not autobiographical, a lot of my heart is in this story. And it's about a girl who dreams of becoming a professional soccer player one day. And at the time that the story takes place, soccer is not a professional sport in Argentina yet. It has since become a professional sport back in 2019, which was just last year. But the journey for equality and for more opportunities for women athletes is still an everyday battle. So it's still as relevant as it was when I was writing it a couple of years ago. So I'm gonna read from the very beginning, chapter 1. Lies have short legs. I learned this proverb before I could speak. I never knew exactly where it came from. Maybe the saying followed my family across the Atlantic all the way to Rosario, the second largest city in Argentina at the end of the world. My Russian great-grandmother, Isabel, embroidered it on a pillow after her first love broke her heart and married her sister. My Palestinian grandfather, Ahmed, whispered it to me every time my mom found his hidden stash of wine bottles. My Andalusian grandmother, Elena, repeated it like a mantra until her memories and regrets called her to the next life. Maybe it came from Matilde. I don't know if that's my phone. The woman who chased freedom to Las Pampas all the way from Brazil. But of her, this Black woman whose blood roared in my veins, we hardly ever spoke. Her last name got lost, but my grandma's grandma still showed up so many generations later in the way my brown hair curled, the shape of my nose, and my stubbornness. Ay Dios mío, my stubbornness. Like her, if family folklore was to be trusted, I never learned to shut up or do as I was told. But perhaps the words sprouted from this land that the conquistadores thought was encrusted with silver, the only inheritance I'd ever received from the indigenous branch of my family tree. In any case, when my mom said them to me as I was getting ready to leave the house that afternoon, I brushed her off. I'm not lying, I insisted, fighting with the tangled laces of my sneakers. Real Nikes that Pablo, my brother, had given me for Christmas after he got his first footballer paycheck. I told you, I'll be at Roxana's. My mom put down her sewing, a sequin skirt for a quinceañera, and stared at me. Be back by 7. The whole family will be over to celebrate the season opener. The whole family, as if. For all their talk of family unity, my parents weren't on speaking terms with any of their siblings or cousins. But my dad's friends and Pablo's girlfriend would be here, eating and gossiping and laughing until who knew when. You know Pablo, Ma, I'm sure he has plans with the team. He specifically asked me to make pizzas, she said with a smirk. Now, you be on time and don't do anything stupid. Stupid like what? My words came out too harsh, but I had stellar grades, I didn't do drugs, I didn't sleep around. Hell, I was 17 and not pregnant, unlike every other woman in my family. You would have thought she'd give me some credit, be on my side. But no, nothing I did was enough. I was not enough. It's not like I can go to a gigante. I don't have money for a ticket. She flung the fabric aside. Mira, Camila, how many times have I told you that a football stadium's no place for a decent señorita? That girl who turned up in a ditch, if she hadn't been hanging out with the wrong crowd, she'd still be alive. There was a little bit of truth in what she said, but just a little. That girl, Jimena Marquez, had gone missing after a game last year, but she had been killed by her boyfriend, El Paco. He and Pope Francisco shared a name, but El Paco was no saint. Everyone knew that, just as everyone knew he used every woman in his life as a punching bag, starting with his mother. If I pointed this out, though, my mom would start ranting about the Ni Una Menos movement, how it was all feminist propaganda, and I'd miss my bus. My championship game, the one my mom couldn't know about, was at 4, the same time as Central's league opener. At least they were at opposite ends of the city. Vieja, I said, instantly regretting calling her old. She wasn't even 40 yet. We live in the 21st century in a freeish country. If I wanted to go to the stadium, I could. You could too, Mommy. Pablo would want to see you there. You know that, right? Her face hardened. The last time she'd been to the stadium, Central had lost. And my dad had joked that she'd been La Cheta, bad luck. My mom was a never forgive, never forget kind of person and would remember his words until her last breath. Because what if he was right? What if she had been the reason Pablo's team had lost? Throwing my last card, I let just enough of the truth spill out. I was going to Roxana's after my game to quench her fears. At Roxana's, I can hear what happens in the stadium, Mama. Just give me this, please. What am I supposed to do here all day? She tugged at a stubborn thread. It's Mama, Camila. Don't talk like a country girl. If my sister Graciela heard you speak like this, her eyes swept over me and up and down. And why are you wearing those baggy pants, hija? If you'd let me make you a few dresses. I almost laughed. If she was speaking on how I talked and how I dressed, I'd won this battle. But then she said, we're hiding something, and it worries me. My heart softened. I'd been hiding that something for an entire year, since Coach Alicia had discovered Roxana and me playing in a night league and recruited us to her team. Pobre mama. I wish I could share my secret with her, but in spite of what my parents believed, I had learned my lessons. When I was 12, my dad found me playing football in the neighborhood potrero with a bunch of boys. I'd been having the time of my life until he started bellowing at me in front of the whole barrio that he wasn't raising a marimacho, that football was for men. I took it all in silence, ready to cry at my mom's feet, but she sided with him. I hadn't talked to her about football since. Ciao, Ma. I pecked her cheek and dashed for the door and freedom. I'll tell Mrs. Fong you said hi. Answer your phone when I call you. My cheap phone was inside my backpack, safely out of credit. But she didn't know that. Ciao, te quiero. I threw her a kiss and ran out before she could stop me. I paused for half a second by the closed metal door of our apartment, but she didn't say te quiero back. The neighbor's music, mi gente, set a reggaeton rhythm for my pounding feet. I took every shortcut between the cinder block buildings and shacks in 7 de Septiembre, our barrio. By the time I made it to the bus stop, I couldn't hear the music anymore, but the pam-pam beat still resonated inside me. The 142 bus turned the corner just after I checked my watch, 2:40. We're on time. I gave the driver a grateful smile as I scanned my student card on the reader. And when it beeped, I thanked La Virgencita. I couldn't really afford to spend money on the fare, but the game field in Parque Irigoyen was too far to walk. Well, you're lucky, the driver said. This is the emergency services bus for Central's opener. Most scoundrels are already at El Gigante, but I'm supporting from here. He smiled, showing me the blue and yellow jersey peeking out from under his worn blue button-up. You heading there? I didn't want to give him an excuse to get too friendly, so I shrugged and found a seat. The shiny black leather was cracked, with yellowing stuffing peeking out, but it was far enough from both the middle-aged couple making out in the back and the man leering at me on the right. The bus gathered speed and left El Barrio. The drone of the engine and the warmth of the heater lulled me as I gazed out the window at the still naked August trees and the flock of birds who hadn't made the flight north for warmer weather. I think we can end it there.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Thank you so much, Yamile. Amazing, amazing, amazing. For the people who just hopped in, feel free to use the chat so that we can chat in our questions. And I'll just get this Q&A started. So I feel like the only appropriate way to start a Q&A with this book is who are your top 3 favorite football players?
Oh my goodness, that's such a tough question, but I'm gonna say who I always say, Marta from Brazil and Orlando Pride, Leo Messi, of course, and right now I have to say Paula Dybala.
Okay, I'll be looking some of those up afterwards, but I was like, I gotta know. Like, and then I guess, cause you play football, right?
I know, I couldn't play when I was a little girl. It wasn't appropriate for girls to play in Argentina in a team. Like I would play with my family, and especially my brothers or my cousins. I have photos of us playing at Sunday picnics, But no, there were no girl teams. And if there were, my parents were not encouraging, and not because they were horrible people, but because they wanted a good future for me. And it was so looked down upon that no, the appropriate sports for girls in Argentina when I was growing up were field hockey. And Argentina has an amazing field hockey team for women. We are multi-world champions, and they always win the Olympic medals. And in fact, Luciana Aymar, she was the captain for the team, and they would call her the Messi of hockey. And she would say, no, she's the Luciana Aymar of football. And the other appropriate sport would be volleyball or gymnastics. And I always wanted to do gymnastics, but my parents were very humble, hardworking people, and they did not have the resources to send me to gymnastics. So I was not an athlete growing up.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. My parents didn't have any extra money for extracurriculars as well. So I spent a lot of time chilling at home, looking at all the other students doing extracurricular stuff. So I got this question. I don't know if you played enough soccer to be able to answer it, but what's your favorite position of playing football?
I like the middle.
You like the middle? Okay.
Yes, because she can divert and you can have a very clear vision of the field. And it's just fun to be the game maker.
I could only play defense because I get nervous when I have to dribble it, but I can kick it away. So that's the thing that I was able to do. So along with Furia, this book also came out this year, which is On These Magic Shores. Both are really excellent, and both feature like protagonists who are young girls who must navigate complicated family dynamics, societal pressures that are unfairly placed on women. Both your protagonists here are strong, resilient, confrontational, have a remarkable sense of self-possession, like especially for her. I was just like really impressed, like, oh, she really woke, like she got this. If you haven't read the books yet, I think the closest character I can think of is like Korra from Legend of Korra. So like this very strong woman who's
that is the greatest compliment you could give.
Oh my God. So my question for you is, why are you drawn to these sort of protagonists, and do you plan to continue representing this sort of young woman in the future?
Well, I don't know if you have heard the phrase strong female characters that came out a few years ago when YA was starting to get super big with Twilight, and then the Hunger Games came about and kind of revolutionized kidlit forever. And sometimes the industry would call these characters strong female characters. It just meant a girl with a sword or a girl going to war. But I think there is so much more about being a strong female character than just killing people or being ruthless. It's a way of life. And I am surrounded by strong girls and powerful women who fight everyday battles to follow their dreams in a society that sometimes for one side, they tell them, yes, you can do whatever you want, you can be whoever you want to be. But at the same time, we put so many obstacles in the ways of these girls and these women, and we contradict our original messages. So I am a very determined person. I came to the US by myself when I was barely 19 years old. Sometimes when my husband would say, why are you so stubborn? I'm like, you always, I mean, who do you think you were marrying? Of course, I'm a stubborn person because I had to have this personality to achieve my goals. And I feel like sometimes when we tell girls, I have a 13-year-old girl, and she and her friends are loud and passionate and so full of everything. And sometimes they're told, you're too much of everything. But these are amazing traits that we want them to cultivate because they will need them in the future. And so it's hard sometimes to be, as a parent or an educator or an authority figure in their lives, to know how to, in Spanish we would say encaminar, how to lead them to use these traits and these characteristics for good things. But I think we all have to learn how to motivate without quenching down these beautiful attributes of being loud and stubborn and bossy. Those are my favorite kind of characters, and that's why I write them.
So we're gonna see more of them in the future, it sounds like.
I mean, today I was able to announce my next project for Scholastic, and it's a 4-book series about a girl who decides to revolutionize the barn where her father works, and she sets up this program for underprivileged children so that they can have an opportunity to be horse girls and horse boys as well. So yes, so at least 4 more in that direction of girls making trouble and changing the world. So yes.
Okay, we'll be looking forward to those. So I've already mentioned this, but in your bio, it says that you were the inaugural Walter Dean Myers grant recipient at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Walter Dean Myers had a gigantic impact on me as a young boy of color. I read his books from Gloryfield to Monster to Bad Boy to Slam to Hoops. And his work like introduced me to a lot of histories and experiences that were just marginalized in my public education that I just wasn't given access to. So my question is, did Walter Dean Myers' work impact your work at all? He also writes about sports like basketball. But I guess, who are your role models when you think about YA literature and middle grade literature? The folks you're looking to the most?
You know, sometimes I used to say, I am embarrassed that I didn't know the work of so-and-so until I became an adult. I stopped being embarrassed about that because, number one, I had no access to these books. I grew with a very different canon. I grew up in Argentina, where we had our very own rich literature for young readers, like Alma Maritano, María Elena Walsh. I grew up reading Borges and Isabel Allende. So those are my literary heroes and ancestors. But then when I came to the US, and one of the first things that I did when I went to my school, I went to Brigham Young University, was visit the library. 6 stories of books. I was in heaven. and if I could have just stayed there and lived there, I would have. And what I did, I arrived to Utah a month before school started. So for that whole month, I think I just read in both English and Spanish, just randomly. I would get books, and if they were boring, I would put them away. But I read a lot of also Spanish language literature that I didn't have access to because, again, I lived in a poor neighborhood. We had no library, and I only had access to the books that my mom worked for a teacher, and she would lend me books. And so my education was very limited to what I had been exposed to in school. And then when I had access to books, and you can imagine when we had access to virtual, like digital books that you didn't even need the physical copy, that was like, I would just gorge in words and read as much as I could. And yes, Walter Dean Myers, even though I didn't know him until I was an adult, he changed my way of looking at story and who the stories were for. And even if his words did not change me, he paved the way for me to be an author in this country today, writing in a language that is not my first language, and about stories that were told, were niche stories that the market for them was very limited. And now, because of the work that he and other people like Meg Medina and Jackie Woodson and Pam Munoz Ryan from Esperanza Rising, all the work that they've been doing for years and years before diverse books became cool, they allowed me to be doing what I'm doing today.
That is awesome. So there's a lot of prominent like social movements and issues that you tackle in your books, such as like Ni Una Menos. And that's both for like On These Magic Chores and Furia. And I was wondering whether you can talk about how you approach difficult conversations about race, gender, and class with such young audiences. And how do you find a balance between like the character, the craft, the politics, and the plot? Like you manage to juggle so much together in these books that I'm just wondering what your insights are there.
Well, when I'm writing the first draft, I just write the story of my character. And then it's the work that takes place during revision and rewriting, in which I go back and see how these elements complement each other, how much of what I wrote down are my thoughts as an adult trying to sound like a child or a young person. I have discovered that sometimes as adults, we say, oh my goodness, children are too young to be learning about this, or these are too heavy topics. We forget to things. Children go through these things every day of their lives. And so if it's I'm blanking out of her name, Rita Williams Garcia, when she wrote her one of her books about menstruation and periods. She was told, oh, these are too heavy topics for children. And she said, these are heavy topics for children to go through. So if they can go through, we can read about them. And if they don't have the information, we're gonna make things even harder for them. And writing about these topics gives children and young people the opportunity to explore complex situations in a safe manner. Situations that they have experienced themselves, or hopefully situations that they will never encounter, but that will give them a window into somebody else's life and hopefully encourage compassion for somebody who has a different experience from theirs. And the other thing that we forget as adults sometimes is that children are much woker than we are. My kids are so aware of everything that's going on in real life. And my daughter is the 13-year-old. She started using TikTok when it first came out. It was just to make these cool dances. And now there's this revolutionary movement happening through TikTok. And she was one of the early adopters of the app, you know? So I feel like as an adult, I am the one that is trying to catch up to these new ways of thinking and shedding my own prejudices that I adopted throughout my life, and that are not valid anymore. But at the same time, I've had to always try to remember to be authentic to my character's journey. That even if sometimes I want to add a little more, I have to be honest with what the character would do and say and think. And Minerva is a very outspoken person, and she would not let anything pass. And so as a child, I wouldn't have been that brave to talk back to my teacher and change the whole school play. I wish I had been that brave, but I know there are little girls that are brave like her, or that they're just waiting for one example to show them what to do and what to say. And I hope to give them the tools with my books.
That is such a beautiful answer. I'm just gonna bask in it for a little while.
Thank you.
The next question. So in both these books, you were concerned with breaking toxic cycles within families. And Furia especially wrestles with the necessity and the damage that lies have in our family life. So like, it starts with lies have short legs, but like a lot of these lies were also protecting her. So I'm wondering whether you can speak more on why you focus on these issues and what you're hoping to convey kind of with that wrestle of like breaking family cycles and like a lot of the familial lies that just kind of exists in everybody's family.
Yes, I feel like as humanity, our whole planet is going through a revolution. Earth, I mean, you can see all the natural disasters, and there's this political and social movements happening in pretty much every country in the world in one way or another. I feel that there's going to be a reckoning to all ways of thinking, and hopefully, I'm an optimistic person, so I want to believe that the world will be better, that we're gonna leave a better situation for our future generations. And I'm very hopeful in the work that these future generations are going to do. And so I feel like the theme of breaking family cycles is something that every family is going through in the world, not only my fictional families in my stories, but also my personal ones. Because there are a lot of things that now, looking back as an adult, I realize the trauma that my parents went through, and my grandparents who were immigrants in Argentina, and the fact that I don't know a lot of my family history that was lost through immigration and slavery and oppression. And those are things that weigh upon us. And even if our families were not oppressed, what part did our family play in all these systems that were established? And the other thing that I would like to bring up, shine a light on, is that these topics, these things of misogyny, violence, racism, prejudice, they don't only affect the people that are the oppressed, they affect all of society, whether you're in the groups that are in power or the groups that are oppressed. And I feel like if we are going to heal as human beings and be better, we all need to explore these topics that affect our families. Like I've seen this phrase on social media, especially through the pandemic, that everybody needs to go to a therapist, because I feel like we all have things that we have to work through, either personally or as a society. And I say that the things that Camila deals with in Furia, or the things that Minerva deals with in her family life, with an absent father, a mother who works 2 jobs, but she's absent, even though she's not absent because she wants to leave her daughters alone, but somebody has to support these 3 little girls. They have no social network, like a real social network in a foreign country, and how it affects them. These are just reflections of what's happening in society at large. So each family and each person is just a microcosmos of what is happening in a larger scale in the world. And so these are interesting things to write about, because even though the characteristics that make Furia who she is, or what make Minerva who she is, are very specific to them, in their specificity is where people can find things to relate to these characters. Sometimes a lot of authors want to make their stories relatable to a wide audience, so they make the character very general and very blank, and then nobody connects to the character. But if you make them as specific as you can, you are guaranteed that it's going to resonate with readers.
Thank you so much for that wisdom. A reminder that you can be putting questions in the chat, and since we're a small room today, if you want, you can like unmute your microphone and then be like, yo, I got this question right here.
Yes.
I feel like my last question about Furia, before we maybe just have conversation about stuff, is, so it's very, like you had mentioned in the beginning, that this is like a very personal book for you, right? And like a common theme when you're talking about fiction writers is that usually like your first book, your first novel is like very autobiographical. This one, like you're not a professional soccer player, so like there's not that part, but at the same time, it is clear just from reading it that it's deeply personal for you. So I guess like the question I have is, like, when you were drawing from your own biographical reality, kind of what aspects were you drawing from there? Is this like your vicarious, like what would have happened if I could have played football, like sort of novel, or like, those are all like the questions that kind of bubble in my head, just because I can feel that intensity there.
Well, there's a lot of me in Furia. I did grow up in government housing. My barrio was called 7 de Septiembre. I went to an all-girls school. Sometimes when people, especially in the US, they're like, oh, you went to private school, you were so privileged. I'm like, we were super poor. That's all the parents could pay for. But they gave me all they could, and all they could was an education and an all-girls school. And so those things are the same. My team is Rosario Central. I mean, I cannot fake that. And I cheer for Argentina every time. And I love mate. I have my mate next to me, because I'm at one of my events, somebody asked me about mate and I did not have it. I'm like, how come? But I always make sure I have it next to me now to show those who are not familiar with mate. So yes, there is a lot of me, especially a lot of my homesickness for Rosario. When I was writing Furia, I hadn't been back in Argentina for 7 years. And I was in my 20s, but I already had 4 little kids. So it was very inaccessible for us to travel. And by then my parents lived in the US too, so I didn't have a place to go. And it was a very complicated time. And since I couldn't go physically, I wrote my virtual reality. And Diego is my teenage dream. And yes.
Wait, so is there a real Diego out there?
Yes, my husband is Puerto Rican. He never liked soccer or football until he met me. We met in '98, so it was during the France World Cup. And I remember, you know, when you meet somebody, you try to be all proper. And then it was the game against England, and Argentina won in the penalties. And he's like, what? He came to watch the game with me and my Argentine friends. And he's like, you guys are crazy. We could not understand what was happening. We were so happy. Nobody to celebrate here in Utah but us. But ever since, he's become a soccer fanatic. So I have infected him. And in fact, after the second Copa America that we lost against Chile, he was just devastated. And he said, I'm not doing this anymore. It's not even my country. But yes, Diego is my teenage dream. But at the same time, even if I always say Camila has a lot of who my mom was. So if my mom was the one person in my family who broke this cycle of abuse and oppression for the women in the family. And she was very adamant for me to go to school and have the opportunities that I had today and all the privileges that my education gave me. And although her name won't be on the cover of the book, it was only possible because of the sacrifices that she made. And so yes, there's a lot of Camila in her. She did work at an orphanage when she was a teenager. And I remember listening to her story. And she was an orphan herself. And so a little bit of Diego in her too. And I just drawing from the examples that I saw around me, all the strong women in my life, my neighbors. I mean, being from Argentina, we had women presidents from the mid-1900s. And so we had that example of women being in power for good or evil. I mean, Camila doesn't pass judgment on how good these women presidents ever were or not. But the fact that that was a reality for her really affected her life and mine as an author, because it did give me, in spite of everything happening in society, of the violence or the misogyny or the crime and the financial crises that happen in Argentina in this very previsible cycle every 2 to 3 years. In spite of all that, I think I have the optimism of my country people that we just keep going no matter what, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but if there is a tomorrow, you're gonna land on your 2 feet. So just seeing those examples is what inspired my story.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing all that. And it, like, for me, it relates a lot to like the way I think of my own family. Like, my dad was an orphan as well in Salvador, and my mom was definitely one of the like primary like people in her family to break a bunch of cycles. And like El Salvador was in a war during the 80s and 70s when she was growing up. So like that kind of burden was especially huge for her. And it's just been really heartening to like hear you share and like be vulnerable and share those parts of your history. So thank you so much for that. Christine, Ami, do y'all got any questions that y'all want to have? I have plenty of more questions because like I mean, it's very curious about Yamile as like a person, and like have other questions that I can throw out there. But also, this isn't the Willy Palomo show. So if y'all have questions, y'all can drop your questions. Yeah. Unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hola, Ami.
I don't know what the... Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Bien.
¿Qué tal? Nos estamos viendo la cara, hola.
Por fin, qué lindo verte la cara.
Qué vergüenza, está mi gato ahí.
Bueno. We've met each other on Twitter, but we've never seen each other before, so this is awesome.
No. This is like the first time she sees my face, so this is so weird, but it's so fun.
I love it.
First, wait, I started writing it and I didn't like send it. First, really, thank you. Yes, I don't live in Rosario. I'm 20 years old. I'm saying she knows it, but yeah. So like as a person who was in the last 3 years more or less the age of Camila, the level of I was like seeing stars when I was reading the first 5 pages, because it's home. Like I don't know how to explain it. Like it's home, and that hasn't happened to me of reading a book, especially because right here in Argentina we consume a lot of American media, a lot of European media. So we are, just to give you an example of the level of ecstasy one hears when seeing ourselves in like American media. Dude, in the High School Musical 3 movie, that part of the musical number when they scream Buenos Aires, I was 8 years old and it blew my mind. So just so you imagine how fucking weird it's to see ourselves in media, like it's so weird. Like culturally, someone abroad says mate, and we're like, mate, sí, Argentina, dale, Argentina, papá, nos volvemos. We go crazy. So this part of the spirit of, I don't know, Argentinian pride, I don't know. We are obnoxious for Uruguayans and Chileans who fancy themselves more chill about it. They are not. They fancy themselves more chill about it, but we go crazy. That's an Argentina reference, and we go crazy. So reading a book of an Argentinian girl going through the things she goes, Camila goes through a lot of things. Like, I don't even have like the same family as Camila. I don't have the same ancestors. I don't have Palestinian ancestors. I have Jewish ancestors, or who knows where, who knows. But the things the parents say, even if you are from a mildly progressive family, like they don't tell you, they don't tell you women belong in the kitchen, but they do tell you, really, that skirt at this hour, are you going to go with that short skirt? Are you going to, not because they are evil, but because it's ingrained in the society. Yes. So I don't want to rant about myself, but just so like someone who is not Argentinian understands the level of belonging. Once it's like, I know it's not autobiographical, but it's home. Like the level of it's home. And I think it's such a great fit for someone who says it. You say yourself, you hadn't been in like 7 years when you wrote it. So it's difficult to be far and yet not have rose-colored glasses, because I saw the good and I saw the bad, and it wasn't caricaturized. It was nuance. It was a level of nuance that you can understand. The one of the first things that hit me like a truck, like that's when I said, wow, I'm sold, is I think, I'm not sure it got the connection, so I'm not sure if you read, but it's in the chapter, the next chapter she read, or the chapter she just read, where she's in the, Camila's in the bus, and it comes the boy with the estampitas, and he leaves the estampita, and that image is so iconic. It's life. It's day to day. It's daily life here. Okay? It's daily life. You just know that the estampita of a saint, or the estampita that says kisses and love. So you buy it because you want to help the boy, not because you want to give someone a small postcard saying kisses and love. Yes. My question was, I'm a wordy person, sorry. I go on. My question, I'm gushing about the book. I'm taking advantage of the fact that I don't have Twitter character limit. Just going, gushing. The point, my question was, as someone who was a teenager, I don't know.
A long time ago.
A long time ago in Rosario.
Your mom, so yes.
In the 80s, I suppose, before the 80s.
Yes.
I think you're more or less my mom's age.
Yes.
In the 1780s. And now, with the whole Ni Una Menos and all that I think you have family still here.
Yes.
So you can hear it. Do you feel like there's I don't know, because it's weird, for my generation, we cannot like do the bridge in time. Regarding machismo, do you think there's a change, or do you think it's the same thing, just more visibilized? Do you think there is a same feeling that you felt when you were younger, but now you can talk back more? What do you feel about regarding machismo, comparison between Camila's time and your time as a teenager?
Time. That's an excellent question. And Ami, I wish I could tell you there is a lot of change. I wish I could tell you that there was power in the movements that came before Ni Una Menos, but there's still so much work to do. When I was in elementary school, there was the case of Maria Soledad Morales in the province of La Rioja, I believe. And she was a girl who was in high school and disappeared. And everybody looked for her, but she was a girl from middle class. So unlike the girls that disappeared every day, people were looking for her and people cared. She was also running around with a group of boys that were the sons of famous politicians in Argentina. And then she was found dead because these boys killed her. And that case of Maria Sol changed my generation, because it could be any of us. And it was also very powerful because one of the people that were spearheading the movement to solve her case was the principal of her school, who was a nun. And just seeing that quiet little religious lady taking to the streets and calling out these government people was very powerful. And back then it was just the troublemakers would go to las marchas and protests. But after, I think, Sister Petroni, I think was her last name, it created the opportunity for Ni Una Menos to happen in 2015. And I think that now there is more of a conscious that these problems don't only happen out in the streets or in poor neighborhoods or in violent zones of the city. They happen in our homes and everywhere. And we're not gonna stay quiet anymore. And the other thing is we're not forgetting these girls and women's names, even if they keep happening. So there's Cora saying hi. And I feel like I am an optimistic person, and I want to believe that this Ni Una Menos movement is just a wave that is rippling across all the continent, because in the past it used to just be separated by country, right? And it just, Maria Sol, we only knew about her in Argentina, but I feel like Ni Una Menos now has spread. And even when there was the controversy with the Supreme Court appointment, this group of Chilean women were singing the song El Violador Eres Tú, like at the doors of the Supreme Court. And that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the quiet work that came before it. So I think now seeing famous men embrace the movement, or even if it's just performative, at least they're doing something. When the famous soccer players say, no more violence, Ni Una Menos, or they pose with the women's soccer player, has an impact. And little by little, we're changing the mentality of our society at large.
That was such an amazing answer. Oh my gosh. Well, there's more time for more questions. I'll drop one question now, and then we can see if y'all want to type them in the chat or raise your little manito. But yeah, what sort of relationships have you been able to maintain with Argentinian writers then? Because like, I feel like that's something really special about you. Like, you're bilingual, you're writing in your second language, which I don't get how, like, I could not write in Spanish like that. Like, my Spanish is terrible. And not able to keep up like that. So that's something that's really impressive. And that's just a lot of opportunity to be able to like build bridges across different audiences. So I guess, what's your experience doing that?
So the reason I started writing in English was that living here in Utah, I had no support network of other Spanish speaking or Spanish writing people. And so when I found my first writers group, everybody just spoke English. There was one lady, and because there's the big influence of the LDS Mormon Church, she had been on a mission to Chile, so she spoke Spanish. She didn't write in it, but she could understand it when she came upon the Spanish words in my stories. And it's still very lonely because I am the only Latina author in the whole state. There used to be Corny Alameda, who's a good friend of mine, and she moved to Idaho, so I'm by myself now. And it is very disheartening at times. I am very active with the Latino community here in Utah, especially with this organization, Latinos in Action. You might have heard of them, really. And I go to their conferences, and in March or April, there are 3 conferences that happen at BYU, the University of Utah, and another college that I'm blanking out on. And there's like 2,000 children of Latinx heritage attending these conferences. And so, and when I talk about books, they have no idea that Latinx authors are writing Star Wars, are writing contemporary, are writing fantasy, or they're winning the Newbery Medal, and it kills or the National Book Award, like Elizabeth Acevedo. It kills me that there are books being written and published for them, but because their teachers and librarians are not knowledgeable, they don't get access to these books. So that's something that I know there is a disconnect between our books being published and then children having access to them. And the other thing I was going to say, I don't really have a relationship with other authors from Argentina, which I would love to, but I have been reading hungrily. One of my favorite books that I read in the last couple of months, because during the pandemic, everything I could read for a while were horror stories or romance. I mean, there was no in between, or horrible or just romantic fluff, you know? And one of the books that I read that, oh my gosh, I was stunned by its power and beauty in its horror was Cadáver Exquisito, which is called Tender is the Flesh in English, by Agustina Basterrica. And it turned me into a vegetarian. That's about, and she's an Argentine author. And so I've been reading a lot of Argentine authors and Latin American, living in Latin American authors in Spanish. They're writing very different things from what the Latinx community is writing in the US, because we're dealing still with identity, of these questions of, are we American, are we not, do we belong? I mean, they don't have those questions in Latin America. They know who they are. So they're writing different things. And my dream is to, now I can't go back home because unless you're Leo Messi, you cannot fly into Argentina. but my dream is to go back home and get to talk to my colleagues in my language and exchange experiences. Also, the reality of publishing in Latin America, we've had this conversation, on Twitter. I mean, here in the US, we complain about the advances that sometimes Latinx authors receive, which is a fortune compared to when you exchange it into Argentine pesos. It's like, oh my goodness, what are you complaining about? $10,000, that can change my life. But here in the US, you cannot live on $10,000 advances when you only get paid once every 2 years, you know? So the realities are very different, and they show in what we write. I feel like American authors are writing more about the ecosystem and society rising up and kind of like rising up from the grime that was left after the dictatorship or the revolutions in Central America. I'm very fascinated by the amazing things being published.
I can't wait till you have the opportunity to interact with like escritores in Argentina. Yes, because I feel like that's been a huge part of the poetic growth for a lot of Salvadoran and Puerto Rican authors I've known. And El Salvador and Puerto Rico are much smaller, right? So like in order to interact with the Salvadoran literary community, like if you know one person, they can kind of introduce you to most of the others. With Argentina, I imagine it's more expansive. And y'all have folks like Borges in your canon, which is like...
Hello. We have Borges and Sabato and Cortázar. And I mean,
yeah, so many people that are like, yeah, these are the Latin American heavyweights. Like, I'm not sure like how much access folks have to like those legacies.
You're not even on the radar. And the other thing is, I feel like sometimes, not in every case, but sometimes literature in Latin America is a little more elitist. Even if they're not getting the advances and the money, they're the college professors or the intellectuals more. And I'm talking about adult fiction, because I am not familiar with the YA authors. I did read El Mal Amor by a Chilean author who is super, super popular right now. And again, I was just fascinated by how different the writing styles and the rules that we tell aspiring authors here in the US, show, don't tell, 3-act structure, there are different rules in other
different like styles of writing.
Exactly, and that's what makes literature so beautiful.
I have more questions, but I'm gonna give Ami and Christine another shot if they have any more questions. I'll look at their shy faces. And if not, then I'll just ask questions off the stuff I'm curious about, because I still have a lot I'm curious about.
Okay.
So we still have BYU.
Yeah.
So and this is like a personal question, so you don't have to answer this at all if you're like uncomfortable.
Okay.
But like, so the question that kind of lingers in my head, having the Utah context, is like, oh, was that a part of the church thing? How did the LDS culture end up informing your work? One thing that I was super excited by is that I grew up LDS, and I used to go to church with Dorani Rodriguez.
I love Rani. She's my friend.
I saw her post about your work, and I was like, what? Y'all know each other?
Small world.
She's amazing. Her whole family and like crew is amazing.
Yes.
So I was just curious, like, what's the relationship going on there between, because if you went to BYU, did you go there as an LDS student or a not LDS student? Like, how has your relationship to the religion kind of shaped just who you became? Because if you've lived in Utah the past like a decade or so, like,
I mean,
it'll
that's the
change.
obligatory question. After people ask you where you're from, are you LDS or are you not? So for those who don't know, LDS stands for Latter-day Saints, after the Church of Latter-day, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which all over the world is known as the Mormons, Los Mormones. So I grew up Catholic. I went to a Catholic school all my life. And when I was almost 15, my family met the Mormon missionaries. My parents were in love with these clean-cut kids, and we all loved our missionaries, and they became dear family friends to this day. So we were converted to the church, and the church saved me in so many ways, because I had a community and I had access to books. And I found out about BYU, and all my life I had wanted to go to school in the US. I don't know why. I mean, you know, those irrational dreams that sometimes you get as a kid. I wanted to be an astronaut. I love science. So that's the thing. I'm the weird kind of person that loves literature. I love numbers. I competed in the math Olympics in my country. I won the regional Olympics. Like, I just loved math and science too. But then, and when I came to BYU, I studied economics, actually, because I just love numbers and the science behind the numbers. But yes, I am LDS. In my older age, my faith also has evolved, because I feel that the longer I am away from home, the more my soul yearns for the faith of my childhood, maybe, and the comfort of my childhood. I do love La Virgen de Guadalupe. My school was Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, so I've always loved her. And the heart wants what it wants. So even though, and I am not your typical LDS person that we have images of Maria de Guadalupe all over the house. My son has a rosary in his car for protection. And so we have, like, with our family, that we created our culture, because my husband's Puerto Rican, I am Argentine, and we've had to create our own third culture in our home. We're kind of the same way with our religion. It's what comes more naturally. So
thank you for such a like smart and astute answer. Yeah, because I totally acknowledge that I kind of drew you a little grenade. Like, that could be a very difficult question to navigate in Utah, but I really appreciate what you said about just like what you're kind of pointing towards of just like different sorts of Mormonisms. Like, my mom experienced Mormonism in El Salvador, and that was very different than what she experienced in Nueva York, and that was very different from what she experienced in Utah.
It's a completely different thing.
Yeah, so like, and that's sometimes, like, in Utah especially, I feel like that's an under talked about thing. Like, for me, growing up LDS was a huge blessing, because in Utah, that's one of the few places I would hear Spanish. I went to a Spanish school where I saw other Latinos. And there's small experiences like that within like Mormon culture that I feel like don't rise to the top and people don't hear about as much. So thank you so much for sharing that. Ami had another question. Where do you see yourself as an author in like 10 years from now, which we know you'll still be kicking ass, but what is your horizon towards you walk to, like Galiano said?
Oh my gosh, I'm a very ambitious person. I want to write, and I have my agent yesterday sent me like a rundown of the things that have coming out in 2022. I have 9 books between my own and contributions to short stories. I'm in 4 different anthologies that have not been announced, and then I have all my horse books and my other YA. So I want to keep writing for it until my last day on earth, and I want to still be telling stories. I would love to write. I have been working actually, and because this is a small audience, I don't get out saying it. I have been working on 2 stories targeted to adult markets, and I'm hoping that something will go from there, and so that I can hit my bingo of writing for all age groups. And I just want to expand different point of views of what it means to be a human. I don't want to always write that immigration story or the belonging story or the girl being the only one in one space. They're fun, they're important, but I'm interested in writing things from other perspectives that will let me live a virtual experience, because life is too short for just the one life. So I just want to experience as many lifetimes as I can in the stories that I write.